Hello and welcome back to Shock's Talks. I'm Shakti, and on this channel we're talking about anomalous phenomena. Today I'm going to talk about the comparison between Carolyn Cory, her theory, David Icke, his theory, Tom Campbell, his theory, and how all of these theories might help us to understand and maybe even explain contact, abduction, and other encounters with non-human intelligence. So let's get into it. Okay, so I actually have only read half of one of Caroline Cory's books. This is The Divine Plan. Ooh, the light is always so shiny on these things. Okay, The Divine Plan, Now and Beyond 2250, Caroline Cory. And on the back here it says, Caroline Cory is a teacher of consciousness studies, spiritual development, and the founder of the Omnium method of quantum consciousness and energy medicine. I'm just going to read you another thing off the back of the book because this describes what this book is about. The Divine Plan, Now and Beyond 2250 is a detailed, uplifting, and practical manual for anyone interested in navigating effortlessly through the important global changes dawning upon this earth. The book offers useful tools and exercises that can enhance your spiritual practices and expand your consciousness so as to begin understanding your individual role in the impending emergence of the new era on earth. So, in addition to reading half of this book, and I think I might try to finish it, it was pretty dense in ways. I also saw her speak at Contact in the Desert 2023, the first time I went, and I got to hear more about her story and feel her energy. She has a very strong presence. She's very charismatic. She's one of those really awake, like sharp people who just, you feel their energy when they're in the room. So that's interesting, you know. And I watched a documentary that she made called Among Us, which I was able to find through the Gaia channel. I think I had to get it through one of the other subscription platforms as like an addition to be able to watch her work. And she's done a couple different documentaries, but I'm just going to tell you some of the stuff that was in this one. So it's about, she has a lot of interviews with people who have had contact. And she talks about ETs, interdimensional beings, and angels. There are some crop circles shown in this documentary, as well as her visiting a crop circle that was recently made. And I saw some interesting cameos as well. We talked about David Jacobs on the last episode of Shock's Talks. Walking Among Us is his book, and his take on all of this is pretty intense. You know, he's very focused on abduction research that points to a hybridization program. What that really means, we're not really sure because there is this confusion around the literal physical hybridization versus something more energetic. And his work focuses on the assumption that there's a physical hybridization program at play, whereas Caroline Cory's work is a little bit more about energetic hybridization as well, which is an interesting and hard thing to wrap the mind around, but she kind of explains how it could be possible by visiting these various scientists and starting to provide evidence for the idea that a non-physical being could have an impact on a physical being. So we'll get into that part of her documentary in a second here. She interviews also Dan Sherman, who wrote this book, Above Black, and we talked about this a couple times on Shock's Talks. I picked this up because Richard Dolan mentioned it once, and I like him, and I wanted to see what was in here. And this is about an intuitive communicator who worked for the U.S. Army Air Force, and he was eventually speaking with aliens through this communication protocol. And he also found out that he had been tampered with, interfered with in the womb in order to be primed for this specific task that he later was tapped for. So that's his story. Interesting stuff. And Caroline Cory talks a lot about how your will does change the fabric of reality. And this is similar to what Tom Campbell is saying in the sense that he might argue that your choices are the most important thing you have in life, and your will is like the force of energy that allows life to happen. This is also kind of similar to what I just heard David Icke saying on this other series by Gaia again. And so, okay, a couple of the interesting experiments from this Coraline Carey study. She goes to a scientist who has DNA samples and is taking measurements on those samples. I can't really give you all the details because I'm no expert when it comes to this, but in my memory, it was like measuring the conductivity of the DNA strands or parts of the DNA. And so there were these electrical measurements. That was one component that they were looking at in this particular documentary. And then they were also measuring the frequencies, like the various frequencies within that sample. So what happened is Caroline Cory went to this lab and she did an experiment where she sat with this DNA sample just on a table, and it was kind of like between her hands like this. And she let some kind of energy flow through, whether it was from like her extra helpers or her own self. I can't really remember, but it was some kind of flow of energy. And she wanted to see if she could have an impact on this DNA. And when they got the test results back, it was a very significant impact. And she had increased the electrical conductivity by 400%. And there was also 2 new frequencies were turned on. So frequencies that weren't there before showed up somehow. I'm not exactly sure how to explain that better, but there was some change that was measurable in the sample is what matters most. So this was very interesting. Another study was around the photons that come off of the human body. So scientists measuring light, measuring photons and photon emissions, and they brought mediums into their study who had contact with what they called their helpers or their guides. And the medium would be in a room and they'd be taking these measurements, and they would say, at a certain point, you know, they're kind of summoning their guides to like do whatever they're going to do for this study. They would say like, oh, my guide just arrived. And right when they said that, at the moment that they said that, there were huge increases in the photon emissions. I wrote down 30% to 400% changes, and of 10 to 50 photons per second, we know that that's significant. So yeah, basically as soon as they said it, there was a burst of light, which is just interesting. It's like, what does that mean? I don't know, but it might mean that there is something real and measurable when it comes to these non-physical entities, and people who talk about having guides aren't just imagining guides, but they are actually decoding a layer of information that is not being decoded by everyone all the time. But the information is as real as anything because, as Tom Campbell would say, everything is information. We are living in an information-based reality. That's what he means by the virtual reality. So it's not the computer game reality, but it is an information-based reality. So these studies are beginning to provide evidence to support that same theory, that many people have and have different ways of describing. So that was very interesting. Let's see what else from this. There were people talking about their abduction stories, a lot of grays, and there were different things going on, like healings and genetic samples being taken. Um, they threw out this estimated number of 203 million people are abductees in the world based on some percentages. You know, there's really no way to know. But basically, people who study this stuff seem to think that a lot of people have had abduction experiences, whether or not they even remember them. And they did talk about hybridization a little bit and energetic imprints. In terms of the hybrid children, she actually interviews some people who claim to be hybrids and were genetically managed in the womb, just like Dan Sherman. This one woman said that her father agreed to the hybrid implantation in exchange for work on a top secret program. So he was already in some kind of maybe government situation, and he kind of bargained and said, sure, go ahead and interfere with my unborn child and give me something I want in exchange, which is wild. According to her, that's what happened. So she's had various tests throughout her life, and they've found just a lot of interesting things. I won't go into all the details because you can watch the documentary Among Us if you want to hear all about it. And let's see. In conjunction. Yeah, so there's a lot of talk of the US government working with ETs in terms of these programs, and these people who have had these experiences. They claim that that's going on and has been going on. The project that Dan Sherman worked on was called Project Preserve Destiny, and it was a communication initiative. He said we've definitely been visited. Barbara Lamb was in this documentary. We've talked about her on Shocks Talks a little bit. She talks about how human DNA can be upgraded and how it can take on new frequencies, which kind of goes back to that experiment that Carolyn Cory did to prove that theory, or to provide evidence to support that theory. And then, so they say that, like, when it comes to changing our DNA, we don't actually have to go about it in this physical way, the way that we would approach our science. So aliens don't have to inject anything into us to change us. They can actually energetically affect the frequencies of DNA, which is what Carolyn Cory did in the experiment. So what this is all kind of leading to is this idea that's coming out from these people's minds and from what they've seen and what they've done and who they've talked to and what they've experienced themselves and the science that they've tried around all of this. They're starting to think that these non-human entities can actually change human DNA regardless of anything physical. So that's pretty interesting. And Carolyn claims that they will lead us into telepathic abilities. Now, this part is always very exciting to me and interesting to me because I do feel a very personal, resonant thing when it comes to telepathy. There's something going on in reality, in my personal reality, that has been going on for years now, like maybe my whole life, honestly. But the telepathic part of it all has felt so important to me, and I've felt so many changes over time within myself and my own understanding of reality when it comes to this. And I feel like different, almost like simulations have come online inside of me, these little training simulations that you could say it's of my own doing. It could be my own mind creating these programs for myself, or it could be coming from somewhere else. I don't know. But what it feels like is this internal video game almost that causes me to think about telepathy pretty consistently and have been for years, like I said, and to see the world through this lens of what if we were all telepathic. And it's as if we're being led towards that potential future, and the simulation is allowing me to prepare myself for that by going through all of these really intense mental exercises and just experiences, you know? So, and I think there is a level of telepathy among humans, and there always has been, but it's possible that we are all going to see an increase in that. And I guess that could sound a little bit out there to some people, but what's interesting is that I'm hearing other people saying the same thing, and one of those people is Cory, and she's talking about this progression towards this telepathic future. And then again, David Icke, I just heard him talking about how the unseen forces in reality are actually working with us to prepare us for this future situation that's coming. So there's something similar being said among these different people, and I'm having my own experience of it, and a lot of people I know have had their own experiences of things like this, so that's pretty fascinating. And Cory talks about how it's up to us to align ourselves with the beings or the agendas of our choosing. So again, we are free will awareness units according to Tom Campbell, and there are forces in this reality, seen and unseen, that have differing agendas, and it's up to us to make our own choices when it comes to this stuff. So you have to have a perspective on it probably before you can make a choice, or you're making a kind of an unconscious choice, which is why I find it interesting to study these things, because I do feel like I'm constantly looking for my internal alignment in life. Like, what is my guiding principle? Why am I here? How am I moving about my choice making on a daily basis? And it can be the simplest, smallest choice or the biggest, most important choice of your life. It doesn't matter. Every choice can be aligned with some sense of purpose or greater good or not, you know? And that's a power that we all have as individuals, which is a huge power. Then Barbara Lamb said, it's time for humanity to wake up and be aware that we are not alone. So again, another person just saying the same thing we've heard from all these other people and whistleblowers and witnesses and contactees and abductees and government insiders and all the rest of it. And then again, they're saying the same thing we've been saying on this channel over and over. We are all consciousness. So this all comes back down to consciousness. And this is the uniting thread across humans and potentially non-human intelligences, consciousness. And then they talk about the purpose of evolution. We're all supposed to, like, the purpose, evolution of species of the universe. So the purpose of these connections, according to Cory, is that there's some kind of process at play that is helping us humans to evolve, which is a common story that we hear among many people who are part of the UFO community also. All right, so that's a little bit about the Cory of it all. Let's see if there's something interesting we should pull out from. So her book, like I said, it gets really heady and really specific, just like the stuff we were looking at in the psychic season. Like, for example, Luis Minero's work versus Tom Campbell's work versus the psychic witch, Matt Aron, or however, I think that's their last name. Anyway, these different authors have their different terminologies and ways of describing the psychic senses and the psychic experience and how that relates to the larger reality that we are all a part of. And similar to that, a lot of these contactees and abductees have their own take on the nature of reality, what it all means, what it is, and they have their own terminology and their own symbols and systems and ways of describing it. Some of those ways of describing it are, to me, more palatable and more eloquent than others. This particular way was like too complex and it didn't really resonate with me, but I don't think that means that it's like not valid or not true. It's just not my favorite flavor of describing reality. But I'm sure there are some interesting things in here that even I would say, like, oh yeah, that makes sense, or I get that part of it, or I align with that part of it. But, different minds, different individuals have their own ways of describing, kind of decoding these pieces of data of reality. So her particular way of decoding it is pretty complex. There's a lot of graphs and charts and different systems in here. And she has her own terminology. So, yeah, I don't know if there's anything I'm really going to pull out to read from this right now. But if you want to check out her work, I would say the documentaries are really good, at least the one I've seen. I've seen other interviews with her online on YouTube. I liked her talk at Contact in the Desert. It's very much, she's very much moving in the direction of energy work and consciousness studies. So this is the case with a lot of people that go down these paths. So now let's talk a little bit about David Icke. He's written a lot of books. He has some really intense theories. I'm not totally deep into his work, but I've been alerted to it at various times throughout my life. And just now I was watching Escape the Matrix with David Icke, which is a little series that he did for Gaia. And just in the first couple episodes, I pulled out some really interesting quotes and notes, so I'll share some of those. So he starts off by framing up normal versus paranormal. So he talks about how in reality, there's this concept or this idea of normal. And then normal, that concept is reinforced by the teachings that we receive in schools, the stuff that is pumped out through the media, the mainstream media, the mainstream science, medicine, academia, and all of these things are reinforcing and describing a version of life. So it's like it's one little chunk of all that is actually real, and that's being pumped out as normal. And so the concept that goes with normal, the terminology, leads us to believe that anything outside of that is actually para. This is another lecture that Lou Elizondo's been giving recently too, but this paranormal idea, it's like above or beyond or outside of the normal. And then this is just unfortunately very limiting, because then people, because paranormal is actually normal, the bigger reality is the fuller reality, and the subset is merely a subset. People who have experiences that are outside of that subset are confused and they're at a loss because the society has said, no, that can't happen. That's not possible. Only what's inside of this subset is what's possible. This is allowable. This is normal. This can be proven. So this is like the big problem with our reality, to be honest, and it's what many people face when they end up having an anomalous experience of their own, is they either face extreme ridicule, some pain, or some stigma around just not even being able to talk about what they have experienced. And that is extremely damaging to people, to individuals, and it's also damaging to the culture as a whole, because it keeps us basically trapped in this limited, smaller understanding. And David Icke talks about how you're the one in control of your life, and taking back that control is what freedom really means. So what he's talking about when he says control is like the power that we have within the system of reality as it really is, and not as we've been told. And this is also, many New Age teachers and ancient gurus and spiritual teachers have all been saying this. So again, nothing new here, nothing new, just one other person sharing their own experience and reinforcing a message that many others have come to on their own. And that's why it's interesting to me. He talks a lot about electromagnetic fields, and again, this relates to the Caroline Cory work because he's talking about these energetic experiences that alerted him to the fact that something was kind of coming through from another dimension, or the unseen reality was having an effect on the physical matter reality. And let's see. Oh, yeah. So, in terms of, he talks about Wi-Fi. So, similar to Tom Campbell and using the metaphors of the internet to explain reality, he uses the metaphor of, or the analogy, maybe that's a better, I don't remember which is which, I'm sorry. He uses Wi-Fi to describe the nature of reality by saying that Wi-Fi, internet, is actual information. It's actual codes and information that are happening in this unseen reality. And then they're picked up, that information is picked up, decoded by a computer, and then rendered for us. And so our experience of the internet is what we see in our computer on the screen, and it's limited to just that. We're not seeing or sensing all of the other things that are going on in the invisible or unseen world in order to bring us that little piece of a reflection of the information as it actually is, which is way bigger. There's so much more going on that we're not seeing. So he's saying that our reality is the same in the sense that we humans have our five senses. Those senses are picking up on those waveforms, like the smell, for example, or hearing is actually a waveform is coming at us. We are decoding it. Electromagnetic information is going to the brain, or yeah, the data is traveling through all these various pathways, and then it gets to this place where it is decoded and then reimagined almost. It's like rendered or made into what he called digital, I think, holographic information for us. And so his whole argument and what he's trying to describe based on his own experiences, his own anomalous experiences, which he goes into on this series, he's trying to say that there's a whole lot more going on that is actually real. And it's not just like, oh, ha ha ha, funny ghosts, or like, oh, mediums, or this is like just weird psychic stuff, or, you know, interdimensional beings. Oh, it's very new age. It's like, no, there's a whole huge reality that we are not perceiving all the time, or maybe we are perceiving it, but we're not even rendering it for ourselves. It's like we're kind of blocking parts of it. And that's kind of what his work starts to teach people to do, is to break free from that limited experience, or let in more information is another way you could put it. So he also talks a little bit about just how when he first came out with all of this wacky information, and he had like a very normal life before, like as is so often the case, he was ridiculed. He said he called it like historical ridicule, like it was a historic event. There was so much, he was treated like trash. And he said that life so often gives you your greatest gift disguised, brilliantly disguised as your worst nightmare. And he said that was the case for him. And what he's talking about here is how the most important thing to do to move forward on these pathways of understanding is to let go of the fear of what other people think. He said if you let that fear lead, then other people are ruling your life. And I do think that's also just a pretty solid message in general. Because if we are here as these free will awareness units and we have all this great power, it feels crazy to imagine just giving that power away and letting other people kind of force us into being something that they feel comfortable with, you know? Doesn't seem right. And he talks a lot about how, from his perspective, life is about expressing and celebrating uniqueness. And I really love that too. And basically, like, as infinite beings, infinite consciousness, just continuously experiencing, that's the whole point, is to really be ourselves and to let ourselves be this unique expression that is being created every moment by our unique choices that we make in reality. And that was kind of like a theme of this day for me and a theme of my life recently. I've just been reflecting on like how much I love encountering people whose energy feels good, but specifically people who are so uniquely themselves in reality, whatever that may be. And it's even more thrilling when they're all different from each other. And I've just recently come into contact with some new people in my life where each time I meet like a new person, I keep thinking, wow, I'm so blown away by like all the variety in humankind, you know? And at the same time, like, we're pattern seeking creatures or pattern recognizing creatures. So I see similarities. It's easy to stereotype. It's easy to make assumptions. I am not free from that. I'm not that transcended, you know, like that definitely happens. But at the same time, I look for the soul, the spirit, the uniqueness, I look to see how that being is choosing to create their life, and that's the lens through which I'm viewing them. And when I'm doing that, I'm just seeing so much beauty in the world. Like, it blows me away. And yeah, I just had that experience recently, and I do love being in that space more than not, to be able to see that beauty all around and to just feel blown away by humankind. And I think that's an important thing when it comes to just us moving forward as people, as consciousness, as maybe beings that belong in a larger family of beings that goes beyond just our own human family. It's nice to come at it with love for who we are, you know? Because when we're coming at it from a place of like self-loathing, which is what it is to actually hate other humans, is actually like self-loathing in a way, then we are really doomed and we're really headed for trouble, because that mental space is going to lead to a path of making choices that do not help us when it comes to preserving and evolving the cultures that we've already created. And that would be really sad. Let's see what else. Okay, David Icke talked about the observer effect from quantum physics, and he would rather call it like the decoder effect, because he's saying that when we look at these particles that are in a wave form and then they kind of solidify into like some other particle form based on the observer effect, it's actually just the same thing as us like bringing that wave form of the psychic internet or the internet of reality down into the computer of the mind and then rendering it as experience for the individual. It's like we are doing this kind of crunching down of information when that's happening. And and then the last thing I'll say from his talk was the key to everything is perception. So that's about focusing on the way we choose to see things. So anyway, these are all, this is kind of all over the place. This is less about alien beings and again, more just about the nature of reality, because in order to even begin to understand or interpret these contact experiences, we really need so much context. And the context that we have is, to the best of our ability, the understanding of the nature of reality. And when we go beyond what is normal and what has been presented within this tiny subset of reality as the whole picture. When we go beyond that into paranormal studies or anything that is more expansive than just the mainstream status quo like level of teachings, that's when we can begin to build a context for understanding things that allows us to interpret these experiences a little more accurately, or at least that's what I'm hoping. So this is all contextual, and this is all just me repeating other people's theories, not to say that I totally agree with anything or that I don't. I'm kind of considering it all, and I'm thinking that what I definitely do agree with, based on my own experiences with energy work, my own anomalous experiences, my own telepathic experiences, and my own cultural upbringing, I do believe that there is a lot going on that is unseen. So there's a lot that we are not rendering for ourselves, or we are blocking, or something in us is blocking it, whether it's a DNA situation or a mental limitation. But what people like Tom Campbell would say is that it's actually a combination of the rule set. So, like, whatever physical limitations exist do play a part, and then our beliefs, our limiting beliefs. And we can't always have an impact on the rule set part of it all. We can't necessarily easily change our bodies, although people are doing science to try to upgrade the human body all the time, or reverse aging, or improve memory, or whatever else people are doing. And there will be more of that. And there's these DNA upgrades apparently that might be real. We hear about it in the New Age community, and we hear about it with a lot of people that have contact with ETs. And based on the science that Cory was sharing, maybe there's really something to that. And maybe those DNA upgrades could allow us to, in fact, render a greater reality for ourselves. And that's exciting to imagine. So, as you can tell, my mind is expanding as I imagine all the possibilities around this. But for me, I'm going to take this into my energy work, and I'm going to continue to use what I have, the tools that are available to me, which is my free will, my mind, my imagination, and the power of my thought. We've talked a lot about thought power here, and I'm using those tools to experience the unseen reality more and more in whatever ways I can, in alignment with my highest good, the good of all. That's my little qualifier that I put onto it all. Like, I want to be moving towards the experiences that are beneficial, because there's all kinds of anomalous experiences available to us, and they're not all headed in the same direction, if you know what I mean. So I think us having an intention as we go into these practices does matter, and is very important, and is a way to keep yourself safe. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking about today. Maybe next time we'll be more organized, but thanks for listening. Thanks, as always, for checking out Shocks Talks. I love thinking about these things. I love talking about these things, and I'm grateful that you're willing to listen. So I'll see you next time on Shocks Talks.